puedo dire che no.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, I want to go over some SHTF, or what we can expect coming up here in the next few months. I say this all the time, but it really seems like there's more on the table right now than in any time that I've been preparing 15 years or so. There's just so many different things, and it's hard to say, is it this or is it that? So today what I want to do is talk about some of the fundamental principles of preparedness and self-sufficiency. Some of these things that we can be doing if something does happen. So it's not necessarily preparing for this or preparing for that. It's just sort of taking a proactive approach to all this stuff because we just don't know. I sort of have this feeling that in the next few months, and by that I mean around the election, before, during, and after, that there could be massive changes, and that could be a disaster scenario. That could be just a status quo economics. That could be world war. I mean, so many different things that are on the table. But because of this, I've done a few videos lately about what we can do to prepare, some mistakes to avoid, and some of the possibilities moving forward. And I wanted to put those in an audio podcast here today. Like I said, we have really no idea what could happen. We can have educated guesses, but we really have no idea. And the best thing that we can do is just sort of be a little bit more proactive about our preparedness and get things taken care of that are sort of all encompassing and are going to help out in a number of different situations. Because honestly, it could go 15 different ways. Before we get into the first part of the show, though, I did want to mention to everyone, I am shutting down the SHTF shop. I am moving that over to mysurvivalfoods.com. And this is a bunch of long-term food storage products. So if you're in the market for some quality long-term food storage products, the legacy foods, send me an email. Go check out the store, mysurvivalfoods.com. And have a look and see what we have to offer. Also, members of the Bug Out Location get a discount. You can become a member over at thebugoutlocation.net. Check out that discount. But I'm moving everything over there because it's much more streamlined and easier to manage and easier for you as customers to navigate. And also, if you have any questions about survival food or how much you're going to need, whether you're planning on purchasing something or not, send me an email at dale@thebugoutlocation.net and ask me anything you want. I'll give you the answers as far as calories, nutrition, things like that. I also have quite a few videos over at my Bug Out Location YouTube channel. But with that, let's go ahead and get into the show today. We'll start off by talking about what we should be doing in the next few months, and then go into some fundamentals and some things to watch out for. In a world full of uncertainty and unexpected twists and turns, it's crucial to be prepared for the unthinkable. I can't remember a time in my life where there's been so much on the table, making it impossible to say one event is more likely than the other. You've got things like the expiration of the petrodollar deal with Saudi Arabia, which doesn't necessarily mean the end of the dollar as the world reserve currency, because there's really no one strong enough to replace it yet. But it does signal the beginning of the end. It signals the loss of faith other countries have in the US dollar and the way that the US does business around the world. You've also got wars breaking out all over the place with what's going on in Europe, the tensions between China and Taiwan, and everything going on in the Middle East. Things could escalate very quickly. And I would even say that NATO is pushing us in that direction. Then you got the government that's more dysfunctional than the Bundys on Married with Children.
Daddy, we wrecked the car.
On purpose.
And a government that cares more about big pharma, corporate lobbyists in other countries than it does about its own citizens. And then you've got all the rumblings about the bird flu going on right now. And regardless of what your thoughts on it are, if they try to do the same things that they did last time, that could lead to a lot of problems. And then you've also got the millions of illegal crossings into this country. And it's not necessarily the South American countries that we need to be the most concerned with. You've got people flooding into this country from all over the world. And we've made quite a few enemies over the years. So why wouldn't they seize on this perfect opportunity to infiltrate the United States? This could mean a number of different things, from terrorism to cyber attacks to sleeper cells around the country. And to top it off, all of this could and most likely would be followed by economic problems. We saw how everything unfolded in the aftermath of the pandemic, the shock waves that were felt for years. That's why today I want to talk about what we should be doing to prepare for the decline of our country and possibly a Great Depression 2.0 and maybe even worse. So the first one I've got here is buying meat. You've got the things going on with the bird flu. You've got the war on farmers and ranchers. You've got the things going on right now with the RFID chips, which is only going to make things harder and almost impossible for small ranchers, while corporate ranchers aren't going to have a problem at all. But this leads to more control over the meat supply. And even on top of that, you've seen prices rise drastically the last couple of years, and that could even worsen. So like I've said in a couple videos, you can get yourself a chest freezer, and just anytime you find deals on it, go to a local butcher, buy a large amount of meat and put it in that chest freezer, and you'll have some to either just save a few bucks when the prices get really high, or if supply is limited, you're going to have a backup to sort of weather that storm. Another thing that I would recommend, if it's possible for you, is buy a couple of chickens, live chickens. Chickens are really easy to raise. They are really low maintenance. You give them a little bit of food, give them a house to protect them from the elements and protect them from predators, and that's basically it. And if it comes to the point where you can't afford to buy chicken feed, you let them out into the yard and they feed themselves, or you put them on the dinner table. So if you can, I would suggest getting some chickens. But I think meat is always one of those top priorities for me. It's the protein. It's the energy that you're going to need in any sort of situation. And if those supply lines are shut off or shut down, or the price is really expensive, you'll have a backup for that. And sort of along the same lines as the meat is the non-perishable foods. Start stockpiling now. I know this is what we do in preparedness, right? Food storage, and we stockpile for unexpected events. But I did want to mention it because it is one of those things that is important regardless of what happens in the future. Next, I have finances, and this includes everything from cash to precious metals to assets and the debt that you have. Now, in the situation that we're talking about today, where we're talking about inflation or a depression, cash, it's debatable on how much value that's going to have. But if you have set yourself up to be in a position to take advantage of this situation, which is easier said than done, you could actually do pretty well, because a recession means it's a buyer's market. So whether you're talking about used equipment or supplies that you need around the house, if you have the ability to get those after the problems are over or calm down, you could actually be a little bit better off because you've got those at a much cheaper price than you would normally. You look at how BlackRock got to be so big and so evil because during the housing crisis of 2008, they bought up a whole bunch of homes that were repossessed. And you better bet these companies and these banks are going to be repossessing homes. But BlackRock basically made themselves a billion-dollar company because people couldn't afford their homes. If somebody is willing to trade you something at a super low price and it's almost a too good to pass up type deal, if you are in a position where you can do that, you'll be better off down the line. But getting into a position to be able to do that is the challenge. Paying off debt, paying off credit cards, paying off your home is almost impossible, but that is one of those things that we should all be working on, because the more we owe, whether it's on a car or any product in the house or the house itself, those people will be coming for that stuff. So try to put yourself in a position where you'll be less affected by something like that. And speaking of them coming and repossessing your homes, it's really hard to pay off a complete home loan. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you could buy a small plot of land, whether you're talking about 1 acre or 5 acres or 10 acres. A plot of land, it doesn't have to really have anything on it either. It's a place that you can go if civil unrest breaks out, if things get really bad, if you get, foreclosed on or evicted, you could buy a pop-up camper or an RV, something similar to that, even sleep in your car if you needed to. If you can get there safely, you've got a place to live. You set up that camper and you basically set up your little homestead. Another great thing about land is it always increases in value as well. So even if nothing happens and you've got a couple acres down in the middle of nowhere, that's the value of that is not going to decrease. It's only going to increase over time. The next one I have here is alternative energy. And I don't mean necessarily buying big generators for your house and powering your house in case the grid goes down. It could, in a situation we're talking about here, a depression type event, inflation, recession, all of these, it could be that just the fact that you can't afford to pay that electricity bill, or you've got to figure out where that money is going to go other than electricity. And if you have options to be able to do that, if that situation does unfold, you won't be sitting in your house in the complete dark at night. You'll have a little bit of power to power a refrigerator. Like I mentioned earlier, all that meat that you bought, if you can't afford electricity or the grid is down, that meat doesn't have to spoil. I did a video just a little bit ago about powering a chest freezer and a mini refrigerator that would keep that meat fresh for an indefinite period of time. I'll leave that link in the description below. But having these alternative energy options, even if it's just a Life PO4 battery or a couple of them, the small generators, the small power banks, a couple of solar panels, all of those things could become important in the future for a number of different reasons, not just a cyber attack that takes out the entire power grid or an EMP that takes out the power grid for months. It could just be the fact that you've got to figure out where your money's going and it's really tight and you can't afford to pay the electricity bill this month or next month. Also, I think it's important to think about personal security. And again, this for a number of different scenarios. You're not thinking about one scenario or the other, but your home security, weapons for self-defense. You look back at the Great Depression and crime rose drastically. Now, again, it really depends on where you are and what situation you're in. But I think we need to be ready for that because desperate people start doing desperate things. And the criminals will always take advantage of situations like this. But even the good people, when they become desperate, will start doing things. So you're going to need to be able to defend the supplies that you have, defend yourself, defend your family. And I think having weapons, ammunition, home security, all of those things are really important regardless what happens in the future. And like I said at the beginning, there's like 15 different things on the table right now, which all could lead to everything just going to crap in this country. And we need to be ready for that as much as possible. And protecting what we have really doesn't matter how much you spend on all the different preparedness supplies and how much food storage you have and all of that. If somebody comes and takes it, then you have nothing. So it's important to think about how you're going to defend those things. Now, the next one I have sort of goes along the same lines as money, as when I talked about putting yourself in a position to be able to sort of take advantage of this situation, and that is bartering supplies. I wouldn't suggest going out and buying a whole bunch of supplies just for the sole purpose of bartering, but these could be the smaller things like lighters and alcohol and all the things that you've heard about could be valuable in this situation. This is something you should be very cautious about because if it's a dangerous situation, you might not want to be bartering all that much. But if it is something like the Great Depression was, bartering could sort of become that alternative economy. Even just with your neighbors. If you have the chickens, like I said earlier, maybe you can barter some eggs for something else and be able to take advantage of that situation, even if you don't need it at the time. And when you come out the other side, once the economy starts getting better, hopefully you're still around, but when the economy starts getting better, you've got these assets that you built up during that time period where a lot of people were struggling, and you set yourself up to be able to take advantage a little bit as much as possible in that situation. So I think bartering supplies, while I wouldn't go out and spend thousands of dollars on Bic lighters or anything like that, I think they are important to have. And it is important to think about this bartering sort of economy, not necessarily as a Mad Max end of the world type thing, but an economy where people are just broke and people need this and you might want that or need that, and you can barter with your friends and neighbors. Now, a couple more I have here aren't necessarily supplies, although supplies are involved in these, but it's more of putting yourself, like I said earlier, putting yourself in the correct position, a position to be able to withstand these types of situations. And one is being mobile, being ready to, we don't want to leave everything that we have and everything that we've built up. And that is usually our last resort. But being in a position to be mobile, to be able to get out if you need to at a moment's notice, being able to, have a few of these smaller supplies that you can load into a truck or your car. And if there is some sort of eviction, they do take your home, or you can't afford these certain things, you'll be able to take some of that with you. If you have that small plot of land and you need to go to that plot of land, you're going to have, like I said, that pop-up camper. You've got your alternative energy things. You've got some clothes packed up and all the things that you will need to survive in that situation. So I think it's important to be ready to be mobile. It doesn't mean we have to at a moment's notice, and it doesn't mean we're planning on bugging out or anything like that, but we need to at least think about that and understand what the possibilities and the scenarios would be where we would need to do that, and make sure that if that situation does present itself, we're as ready as we possibly can be. And finally here, and probably the most important one, is the knowledge. Always try to learn more about all of these things in preparedness. And this can go for everything that I talked about on this list today. When you're talking about non-perishable foods and inventory and rotation, your food storage, you're talking about water storage, you're talking about first aid, cash and finances and all those things. The more we can learn about these, the better off we are going to be and the better we're going to handle these situations. Knowledge is also important for everything in preparedness, whether you're learning how to garden, you're learning how to can food, preserve food, learning hunting and fishing and all those things that could be important in any sort of survival situation. I think knowledge is going to get you through. Understanding situations is going to get you much further than some of the supplies you have, or they will make those supplies that you have even more valuable because you understand how to use them and get the most out of them. So like I said in the beginning, it seems like there's just so many different things going on right now, and it's hard to figure out which direction we should be looking. So I think it's really important we just start being proactive about all this stuff as much as possible. And in my opinion, it seems like more than ever in my life, this is the time to start, really putting a little bit more effort into everything, because the odds are increasing every day that we see some sort of shift. Now, I don't know what's going to happen or if anything happens at all, but things are going to change. And with that change usually comes growing pains. Now, how severe are they? We just don't know. But I think it's important to be ready and prepared for what might come in the near future. And if nothing happens at all, fantastic. We are ready and we are better for it. Over the years, prepping has gained quite a bit of popularity to the point where it's almost sort of mainstream. To me, this is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's good that more people are becoming more prepared, more people are seeing the importance of preparedness, but it's a bad thing because people see the writing on the wall and see the importance of preparedness. Overall, I think it's a good thing that more people are becoming prepared, regardless if nothing happens or if some of the things that we think could happen do happen. I think another factor that has helped prepping become so popular is the available information these days. Back when I started, you had books, a few websites, but not really a whole lot to go on. These days, that information is almost never ending. With videos and articles and podcasts, we can learn just about everything we need to in preparedness. And while it's great to be able to have all of this information, it also means that there's a lot of bad information out there. And that's what I want to go over today, is some of the fundamentals that we should be paying attention to, and some of the things that we should also be a little bit leery of and do a little bit more research on that could actually get us killed. Now, when I say that these things could get you killed, I mean that quite literally. There might be some instances where that's not the case, but a lot of situations, if we fall short in one area or another in different disasters or emergency, that literally could be the difference between life and death. And the first one I've got here, and you've probably noticed this, but there are a lot of AI videos on YouTube these days. And on the surface, it doesn't seem all that bad, but there really is a lot of information in those videos that just isn't good. Some of the basic information in those videos is just fine. But the nuance that you get from people who actually are in preparedness, people like me and other YouTube channels that have been doing this for a while and understand all the ins and outs of this, you're going to get much better information. AI videos are becoming so good these days, you can't even tell they're AI, from the writing to the voices. This video right here shows you what they can do with AI right now, and this is just the beginning.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey there, it's going great. How about you? I see you're rocking an open AI hoodie. Nice choice.
What if I were to say that you're related to the announcement, or that you are the announcement?
Me? The announcement is about me? Well, color me intrigued.
We've got a new model that can interact with the world through audio, vision, and text.
Skynet. We're talking about Skynet.
Now, the reason this is so bad is because what these AI models do is they scrape the internet, they look through different articles and a bunch of different things, and then kind of extrapolate from that and gather their own information. But the flaw in that is, which websites are they looking at? What information are they basically regurgitating? And like I said in the beginning, with all the information available, there's great information, there's bad information, and there's information in between. So I think it's important to just sort of keep your eyes open. You can watch these videos and get the basic information, but do a little bit more research on these. I've seen some that have talked about building a first aid kit from the dollar store. Not a good idea. Yes, you can get some supplies from the dollar store to add to your first aid kit, but don't go straight dollar store first aid kit. And this leads me to my second one. This is the made in China prepping, or the dollar store prepping. And by made in China, I don't mean everything that comes out of China and you need to buy USA only. That is just not possible these days. Everything is made overseas and we import everything here into the United States. So for the most part, that's not possible. What I'm talking about is the really cheaply made dollar store, Walmart, Temu, those types of items. Don't center your entire preparedness plan around those items right there, because when the time comes and you actually need something that is going to hold up and you can't just order another one from Amazon, you're going to want to have something that is high quality and well made. These days, we all have the Walmart mentality or the dollar store mentality where why spend $100 on one of these when I can get 10 of these from somewhere else? And I think that's just, while it does have its place, there are some areas of preparedness where you don't need to spend an arm and a leg to get something. There are some where it's just really important to get the good supplies. And like I said, with first aid kits, that's where we don't want to scrimp too much. Bug out bags, batteries, food storage, just a lot of different areas where we get the high quality supplies. And then if you get a few of the cheap ones to sort of mix in between, that's fine. But we really need to pay attention to quality and not get sucked in by the advertising and the wow, this is so cheap, I'm going to go ahead and get a couple of these. Maybe get a couple, try them out and see how they work. But don't skimp on the really important stuff. And with supplies, I think it's important that we understand as well, it's not always about supplies. I have seen time and time again in my decade plus doing this, where people have all the little trinkets and gadgets and all the cool little things that we all like to buy. But preparedness and survival is about much more than that. It's about having more than just the first aid supplies. It's about having more than just the food storage. It's about more than having, that really fancy fixed blade knife or a really cool water filter. We need to understand everything else that is important in those situations. Having a really high quality water filter is fantastic, but do you understand where to find water, how to find water, what needs to be cleaned in that drinking water? Is that water filter going to work? All of those things that are learning and don't cost us a penny, all of those things we need to pay attention to, I think, even more than the supplies. All of these supplies are super important, but they're only as good as our knowledge in how to use them. A fixed blade knife is a perfect example. You can have a $300-$400 fixed blade knife, but if you don't know how to use it, it's not any better than that, $20 or $30 knife. If you understand what situations you might be in where you would need that, it's going to make that knife even more valuable. Same goes with bug out bags and everything else involved in preparedness. So the learning and the understanding of how to navigate different scenarios and what to do in different disasters or emergency is much more important than having these supplies in the first place. Like I said, the supplies are important, but it's more important. Our understanding of how we're going to navigate these situations is more important, and our understanding of how preparedness works altogether is more important. The next one I've got here is something that most people, I think, pay a lot of attention to, but it needs to be said, and that's make sure that you have a well-rounded preparedness plan. And this maybe is specifically for people getting into preparedness, but if you have 3 months worth of food, but you only have 2 weeks of water, you're not prepared for 3 months. You're prepared for 2 weeks. If you're building up one area of preparedness at a time, say you're working on your food storage, and once you've got that set, you're going to work on some first aid stuff, then you're going to work on some home security, and then you're going to work on your water storage. If you're doing it that way, you're leaving a lot of holes in your preparedness plan, and you're basically crossing your fingers that nothing happens in that time frame where you're getting ready. So what you should do, rather than focusing on one area of preparedness at a time, is focus on a time frame. So if you're getting prepared for 3 days, you're working on all of these areas of preparedness for that 3 days. And then you bump that up to maybe a week, and then 3 weeks, and then a month, and maybe 3 months. And then you go as far as you feel like you need to go in preparedness. But make sure it's a well-rounded plan and you've got all your bases covered at first, because the most likely disasters are going to be the ones that last a few days, or emergencies, the ones that last a few days. So make sure you have your bases covered with those first and then expand out. Don't do it one piece at a time. And speaking of the disasters that are most likely, another pitfall that some people get into is they get sort of tunnel vision and they focus on one certain disaster, whether that be this large-scale disasters that you hear about on the news all the time, or they just focus on the natural disasters, the small-scale disasters, the personal doomsdays. I think that focusing on one specific disaster, or focusing on just the small disasters or the large disasters, really puts a hole in your preparedness plan as well. If you're focusing on, say, a nuclear bomb or fallout or something like that, you'll have all the stuff you need, the gas mask, the potassium iodide, all those things to survive a nuclear blast. But you're missing out on some of the things you might need if you live in the South, if it's a hurricane, if it's a earthquake, or just a really terrible economy, which is something we're experiencing these days, and money is really tight. You're missing all of those things. Yes, you may have the whole family decked out with gas masks and things like that, but if you can't put food on the table or you can't pay the electric bill, the odds are you're going to be looking for somebody to buy those gas masks and all that stuff. So make sure you're focusing on everything, not just the big stuff, not just the small stuff. If that's what you want to do, is just prepare for a couple weeks, that's fine. You do exactly what you feel like you need to do, what makes you comfortable. But it does seem like with the things going on these days that more than ever, something big could happen, whether that be a monetary thing, our economy, whether that be world wars. Seems like there's a lot going on, a lot of fighting all over from the Middle East to China to Russia, a lot of different things that could escalate pretty quickly. So while the smaller disasters are the more likely disasters, the larger type events are possible. They're just not as likely as the smaller ones. But with that, you've got the smaller disasters that are pretty easy to navigate. Say it's a natural disaster or hurricane or something like that. Those are fairly easy to navigate, and you can get over those in a few days. The larger type disasters may be less likely, but the consequences of these are much worse, meaning they are going to last much longer. They're going to be more devastating for a longer time period, more loss of life, more struggles, more secondary and tertiary events, meaning if it is a war, what does that mean? Does somebody attack the United States, and what comes after that? Does that destroy the economy? Does that destroy the electric grid? All those different things. So while the more likely disaster scenarios are the ones that we may face on a daily basis that only last a day or two, these larger ones we can't ignore because of the impact that they might have. Now, it's entirely possible we go our entire lives without seeing one of these large-scale disasters. When I started this 12, 13 years ago, the economy, the national debt was outrageous. And I never thought we'd get to the point where we are here, where you look at the national debt right now, and it's worse than I ever could have imagined. You see the politicians in Washington that act like they don't really even care about us down here. And you see this whole global structure coming together, which is destroying the middle class and basically trying to make life as an average citizen basically a subscription model where you don't own anything and you're happy because you don't. 15-minute cities, things like that. We are going to be seeing some of this coming in the near future. Like I talked about a little bit earlier with the AI videos. This is only the tip of the iceberg with AI. So what does that bring? You've got digital currency. You've got a lot of things that are going to change, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's all for the worst, but life is going to change. Things are going to change, and I think we need to be ready for those. So with this, like I said, you just pay attention to these core things in preparedness. Preparedness doesn't have to be super complicated or overly complicated. It really isn't. It's about taking care of the fundamentals, and it's about learning about some of these different events that might happen and how we are going to respond in those events. And then from there, we can figure out what supplies and what things we need to get through those situations. We watch videos all the time about what supplies you need and what you should be doing in different disaster situations. But it's also important to think about the things you shouldn't be doing, keeping yourself safe and out of harm's way in these situations. Today, I want to go over things we should not be doing when disaster strikes. These things go for the smaller emergencies up to the full-scale SHTF or poop hits the fan type scenarios. While it's true that the more severe the disaster, the less likely it is, that doesn't make it impossible. A hurricane is much more likely than Yellowstone erupting, and we just saw something happen the other day, but that is going to happen eventually. Local conflicts and wars are much more likely than nuclear exchanges, but that's not off the table either. The point is, we need to plan accordingly for these shorter term, less severe emergencies, but we can't ignore the possibility of these longer term SHTF type scenarios. The pandemic was a good example of how sometimes you just don't know how long something's going to last and how things might unfold during that time. The tips I'll be covering today will apply to everything from personal doomsdays to natural disasters to long-term events. By doing these, you'll be as ready as you possibly can be to navigate these challenging times. The first one I've got here is panic buying and avoiding the chaos. Avoid being part of this panic buying when disaster or something happens. People rush to the grocery stores. Avoid this at all costs. Preppers take a lot of heat when there's shortages, but we're really not the ones to blame because what we do as preppers, what we should be doing is taking care of this stuff beforehand, so we're avoiding that chaos and the panic buying. In quite a few different situations, going shopping could be very risky, whether you're talking about just going to the grocery store or you're talking about getting fuel for your car. all of those could be very risky. So avoid those situations at all costs. Don't be one of those crazy people running out to get the last roll of toilet paper like happened during the pandemic. Don't be one of those people that has to go to the store because they don't have something. Be someone that if it's possible to go to the store, you can go get a little bit extra, but don't make it a necessity. The next one I have is don't rely on plan A. As a matter of fact, plan on plan A failing. All plans fail eventually, most plans, so plan accordingly. If you think about this from a bugging out or evacuation perspective, you can have the perfect route set up and how much time it's going to take and how to get all your family members together. But something is bound to go wrong in that plan, whether it's roadblocks, a tree blocking the road, your family taking longer than you expected. A lot of different things can happen in those scenarios. So we need to plan accordingly and have some flexibility when it comes to all of these different types of disaster scenarios. It's really easy to plan for the beginning stages of a disaster or emergency, but as things unfold, the circumstances change and it makes it a whole lot harder. So we can prepare for a natural disaster, a tornado, or an earthquake, the very beginning stages of that. But as things go on, those things change and our plan is going to have to change accordingly as well. And that's why we need to do a lot of research and think about what these different scenarios might be. The next one I have here is we shouldn't be overconfident and we should be practicing everything that we're learning. And most of us are overconfident in one area or another from time to time. We build up our food storage or we learn a new skill and we get really confident about what we can do. And over time, if we're not practicing those, we tend to lose those skills, or the food storage isn't quite where we thought it was after a few months because we've been using that. There's a reason that kids practice the fire drills at schools, right? It helps them react instead of guessing and making incorrect decisions. The same thing applies to preparedness, whether you're talking about a bug out drill, evacuating the home, what you're going to do if there's an intruder. We need to practice those and be able to make those critical decisions without thinking about it or thinking about it as little as possible. And going back to not relying on plan A, this is also a reason a lot of plans fail, because we have this idea in our heads about how things are going to unfold. And when they don't go that way and we haven't thought about them and practiced them, we're not going to be able to adjust course accordingly. So it's really important to practice and not be overconfident in your abilities and what you have. Another thing that's important not to do in any of these situations is be over-reliant on tech. And that doesn't mean we can't use tech and we need to go back to how they lived in the 1800s, but we ought to know how they lived back in the 1800s. We recently saw the CrowdStrike outage, which, conspiracy theories aside, should be a good reminder of how easily things that we take for granted every day could be gone. That was a pretty widespread outage, but it was pretty small scale to what it actually could be. Like I said, all this technology is great and we should use it, but we should also have contingency plans in place. How are we going to communicate when the cell phones aren't working? How are we going to gather information? How are we going to, something as simple as opening a can of food if the can opener that you plug in isn't working? Can everyone in the family read a map if the GPS is out? That is going to be a huge problem for a lot of people if there isn't GPS on their cell phone, because most people these days couldn't read a map to save their life, literally. So while technology is fantastic and we should use it any chance we get, it has made things a lot easier in life. We need to also think about what those contingency plans are going to be and how we're going to do things when the grid is down, when the cell phones are down, all of these different things that could happen in disaster scenarios, we need to be ready for. The next one I have is planning on being the lone wolf. And there are quite a few people, whether it's by choice or they just don't like to be around other people, or they think they're going to have everything figured out by themselves in some sort of emergency or disaster. Very few of us have the ability or the resources to go it alone. Now, there are quite a few different disaster scenarios where it doesn't entail having community, getting the family together, getting the neighbors together, but there are some that do. There are quite a few that do. This isn't a Hollywood script, and we're not Rambo. We don't get to decide how things unfold. And having other people, whether that's a prepping group or just your friends, your family, your neighbors, having those other people will greatly increase your chances of getting through one of these situations. Whether you're talking about physical labor, security, different skill sets, like I said, none of us can do everything. And while this isn't all that important for something that lasts a day or two, as time goes on, people are going to start to band together because it's going to become a necessity. That's how societies have been built since the beginning of time. Different groups of people with different skills come together and build towns and communities and states and countries and things like that. So it's not something where we need to go out and get a prepping group set up right now, or we need to go talk to the neighbors and tell them how they need to be preppers or how they need to be prepared. But we should be making a list of who we might be able to depend on and who we might be able to add to our group in a situation like this, and sort of create bonds and friendships or strengthen friendships, because when that time comes, you are going to need other people. Another big one is don't forget about security. And this is something quite a few people do kind of put on the back burner, I suppose. But you've got all this food, all these things that you've stockpiled, all the stuff that you've done to become better prepared. But if you can't protect that stuff, you really don't have anything. At the very least, this means hardening our homes, and you can go to the extent that you want with this, whether that's something as simple as a Ring camera or full-blown surveillance systems, putting 3-inch screws in your doors so they can't just be busted in, or they've got door armor, which you can put on your door that basically makes it impossible for somebody to bust your door down. And beyond that, you've got the personal security, whether you're talking about defense weapons, you're talking about physical, yourself as your defense weapon, you're talking less than lethal options, all of those things where, say, somebody does get in your home, you're going to have the ability to defend yourself if that happens. And along with all this is keeping ourselves out of those situations. And OPSEC, operational security, and situational awareness could be the most important on this. The more we can do to stay out of these situations or not make ourselves a target, the better off we are going to be. We are not going to have to deal with these situations. This means anything from going to the grocery store or the way your home looks. Do you look like an appealing target to criminals? If so, what can you do to change that? When you go to the grocery store, are you always staring at your cell phone? Do you walk into the store with your head down, or are you scanning your surroundings and looking for people that look a little bit shady and paying attention to that? So operational security and situational awareness, I think, are really important. And at the very least, make sure your home is set up to make it as hard as possible for anybody to either break in or do you and your family physical harm. I've got a video that I will link to below that goes into home security and some things we can do over the course of time that aren't really hard, but will make it harder for anybody that wants to get into our homes. Another thing we can't afford to do is forget about the little details, the small details. It's usually the little things that can cause big problems. And again, this goes back to not depending on plan A. Like I mentioned earlier, the canned food, if you don't have a manual can opener, that's going to pose a lot of problems. Now, there are ways around this, but it's a whole lot easier just to have a can opener that you can open that can with. If you go camping, you know that there's always something you forget. Even if you have planned this trip out for weeks in advance and you've thought about everything, you get up there and you forgot the forks or you forgot something that didn't even cross your mind. It's bound to happen, but we need to focus as much as we can to try to remember and think about all the little things that could cause big problems. Something as simple as keeping your batteries charged just in case disaster strikes, or having your food storage up to date. If you don't have your batteries charged and all of a sudden the electricity goes out, then it's like you basically don't have those batteries in the first place. Expiration dates, the same thing. If we're not rotating our food and paying attention to that, as we go into that situation, we're not going to have the food storage that we thought we did. So while it's inevitable that we are going to forget some of these little things because they just don't pop into our brain, we need to brainstorm and think about as much as we can all of these little disaster scenarios and all of these small details that don't make the headlines, but are going to make a world of difference in any sort of emergency or disaster. Another one that people often don't think about is the long-term sustainability. While most of these emergency or disaster scenarios that we can think about would resolve themselves in days or weeks, some can linger for a long time. The Depression is a good example. Financial instability, that lasted for years. The pandemic was one where we didn't really know how things were going to unfold, how severe it was going to be, and the things that were happening during that time. But the pandemic lasted a while, and it was it could have been worse. I'll put it that way. The pandemic could have been a whole lot worse, and it didn't turn out to be that way, thank goodness. But it lasted a long time, and we need to be ready for what are we going to do after 6 months of something going on. If we've got a few months worth of food storage, we've got a few months worth of water, what are we going to do after that if something does last that long? Now, in my opinion, a complete societal breakdown is really unlikely, but we do need to prepare for those secondary events, for those dominoes that may fall in one of these situations. We need to start working on plans for food, plans for water, plans for money. What are we going to do as far as bartering is concerned? Do we know how to garden? Where are we going to find water if the water that we have runs out? So at the very least, thinking about these things and doing a little bit, learning how to garden, investing in silver, or learning about bartering, all of these things are just good things to know. A situation may never arise where we need to implement those, but we're going to be glad we thought about it if that situation does arise. Another big one that I forgot to mention is energy. What are we going to do if the grid is down for months or longer and we have no way to regenerate that energy? What are our options for light, for heat, for all the different things that we're going to need? What options do we have? And if that answer is nothing, we need to figure out what we can do about those. And as I just said, the odds of something apocalyptic happening are pretty slim. In my opinion, if there were an SHTF situation like that lasted years or a year or longer, you're probably looking at something global, because it would have to be a situation where other countries either couldn't help out or even take advantage of the opportunity to attack. If other countries had the opportunity, we have too many resources here in the United States that they wouldn't just sit back and either let us burn or sit back and not take advantage of that opportunity. So I think if you're talking some sort of apocalyptic scenario, I think you're talking something global. But there are scenarios like EMPs and CMEs, even the grid failure. The American power grid is basically held together by duct tape and baling wire. And with all the hacking and there's just so many different things that could cause the grid to fail. And without power, you don't have the internet. You don't have all these modern conveniences that we depend on. And that could last for months, which would turn life upside down. Make sure and watch this video where I talked about what to expect in the first 90 days following an event like this and how we should prepare for it. There will be a lot of things, even after the first week, there will be a lot of uncomfortable things that we need to think about and that are going to unfold. And if we plan on being there at that 90-day mark, there are a lot of things that we need to do. Now, I am no prepping Nostradamus. I am not the guy to say that if you're not preparing now, it's too late, so don't even bother, or there's going to be a disaster or something happening in the next month or so you need to get ready now. I've been doing this for long enough to know that we really just have no idea. But it sure seems like there are a lot of possibilities coming in the next few months that we really need to be paying attention to. You've got the bird flu that seems to be picking up steam. You've got the inflation and the government spending, which seems like it's just completely out of control. You've got global conflicts. You've got the things going on in Europe, the Middle East, and Taiwan. And then to top all of that off, you've got the election at the end of the year, where regardless who wins could cause all sorts of different problems. And like I said, I've been prepping for a while, and I don't think I remember any time where there was this all-you-can-eat buffet of disaster scenarios that could happen, where you're not sure which direction to look. So in this video, what I want to talk about is what we should be working on in the coming months to prepare as much as possible, regardless what happens. Now, before we get into those, I do briefly want to cover some of the things that are a concern to me moving forward. The first one, and this is one that is always at the very top of my list, is the economy. Inflation is through the roof, and regardless of what numbers the government gives you, and regardless of what they say about it's getting better or getting worse, it is absolutely horrible. You can see in this picture right here, and you may have seen this around the internet, but these are prices at fast food places. Now, I don't eat a lot of fast food, but what this picture tells you is how much prices are increasing. Yes, these corporations will try to nickel and dime and get every penny they can, but as prices rise on products, the price on the food that they sell rises as well. So this is indicative of a much bigger picture on prices around the globe, not just fast food places. So even though the mainstream media and everyone likes to tell you things are getting better, it's still not good. It may be less bad than it used to be, but it's still bad, and it could get even worse. So that's something that I am definitely looking at, is the economic factors that play a role in all of this. Also, you've got the global conflicts. And again, this sort of goes back to the economics, but I don't see this affecting us here at home, what's going on in Europe, what's going on in China or the Middle East, but it could have economic repercussions, and it could have repercussions down the line, just like you've seen with some of these other conflicts. The next one is a little bit concerning right now, and that is the pandemic 2.0, and I've got to be careful what I say here, but this seems like it's awful coincidental, the timing of this. And if they try to pull the same things that they pulled last time, my hope is that it won't work, but we may need to expect those types of things to happen. And then the final one, you've got the stuff coming up in November, which I think is a lose-lose situation, unfortunately. And this is just my opinion, but if one side loses, one side or the other side is going to be extremely upset, and who knows what happens because of that. If, in my opinion, if one side wins, we continue on with the slide that we're in, we're losing our freedoms and completely change the landscape of this country. If the other side wins, it could mean the cracks start showing in this corrupt Washington machine and everything starts falling apart. So I think that regardless one way or the other, the way they've got this system set up, we as American people lose in the end. And from a global perspective, I think a lot of countries are following the same path the United States is right now. So it seems like there is change inevitable. It's just how does everything unfold and how far do the people allow this to go? So with that, like I said, I am going to go into more detail about these later on. I don't want to spend the whole video talking about these. There's just so many different things that could happen in the coming months that, yes, we need to pay attention to them, but it's more important that we prepare for these, and that's what I want to talk about today. And the first couple are the main ones we should have already anyway, and that is your food and your water storage. Now, while water storage is always important, I don't foresee any sort of disaster situation unless it's a Mother Nature type thing or cyber attack, something like that. But I don't see the water supply getting shut off. I don't foresee the grid going down, like I said, unless one of these other things happen. So the water storage, while it is important, isn't one of those on the top of my list. The food storage, however, is on the top of my list, and that is just because of the prices. You never know with the things that could go on, whether you're talking about pandemic 2.0, you're talking about civil unrest because of the elections, things like that, the supply lines getting cut off or shortages, things like that, conflicts around the world, meaning supplies are short. You just never know. And at the very least, prices will be going up. They have gone up for the last few years, and they will continue to go up. They've gone up more than normal in the last few years, and I think they're going to continue to go up. So the more we can hedge our bets on that, the more we can stockpile food, the better off we are going to be if it does get to that point. So even if you're one of those people that think that having enough food to last a year or 2 years is sort of overkill, in a situation like this, it doesn't mean that food is going to be unavailable for 2 years or a year. It just means you're going to be able to have that to draw on if things do get bad. And the more you have, the longer you're going to be able to do that, or the more often you're going to be able to do that. So my suggestion is start building up as much as you possibly can and get the things while they're cheaper right now or on sale, and get those things to help just in case things do go sideways in the next few months. The next thing I'm working on is fuel storage. And while it's impossible to store enough fuel that you would use in a year or even a couple months, we do need to have a few 5-gallon jugs, or maybe even, 5 to 10 of these 5-gallon jugs with a little bit of extra fuel. Now, what I do is take these fuel jugs and put them in my garage, number them 1 through 10, and then I will take the oldest one, I will put that in my truck, take that with me to the gas station and refill that. You can put some fuel stabilizer in there, or once a month or so, twice a month, you can take one of those jugs, fill up your automobile, and you'll rotate through those fast enough. The reason why this helps is when the gas prices go completely out of control, you have some of that maybe lower cost gas, as well as the fact that you just have some stored if the supply lines do get shut off. If the availability of that gasoline is non-existent, you'll have a little bit stored in your home. But I think having a little bit of fuel stored is one of those things where it's just better to be safe than sorry. Another one that I think is very important, and this one can be done over the course of time and do an assessment on your home, but that is home security. With all the different things going on and the possibilities of civil unrest or inflation, crime, and things like that, I think home security is really important and something that you can do, and it's relatively cheap when you consider all the other things in preparedness. With your doors, make sure you have the long screws the 3-inch screws in your door to hold those door jambs shut. You can put film on your windows. You can plant shrubs around your house. Just pay attention to all the different things around your property that would make you a target. Your location is probably the biggest factor in this as far as how far you need to go. Out here where I live, civil unrests and riots and things like that are not a huge concern for me, but that doesn't mean that I'm totally not concerned about it. Out here, it could be smaller scale. So surveillance systems and things like that are important to me out here. Now, like I said, a lot of these disaster scenarios or a lot of the situations that could arise in the next few months don't necessarily involve the grid being down. So some of these camera systems and motion detectors and things like that could still work. Here at the house, I've got motion lights that are set up on solar. I've got a couple cameras that are on solar and a few that are tied into the home. I've got door armor on my door so it can't just be busted in, which is the 3-inch screws are great, but the door armor is absolutely fantastic as far as making sure nobody's going to get into your home that you don't want getting into your home. Do an assessment of your house and figure out where those vulnerabilities are. Think about your operational security and your situational awareness, what your house looks like to other people. There are a lot of things that can be cleaned up and fixed relatively inexpensively to make your property not look as appealing as maybe the person's next door. And again, your location plays a big factor into this too. Are you urban? Are you suburban? Or are you rural? All of those play a big factor. I've got a great video on home security that goes into a lot more detail about this, and I will make sure and leave that link in the description below. It goes over all the different things that you can do with home security. And sort of along the same lines as home security is self-defense. And this goes for firearms. This goes for less than lethal options as well. Regardless of what happens in the future or what doesn't happen in the future, self-defense should be a huge part of your daily life and something you think about all the time. In today's society, we just never know. It's not like it used to be back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. These days, you have no idea what can happen from one second to the next, just going to the grocery store or the post office. So I think it's important to think about those things. And while most of us in the preparedness community think about guns and ammo, and rightfully so, there are also situations that don't call for that lethal sort of self-defense. With all of these things that could be coming up in the next few months, I don't see any sort of Mad Max type situation. So there will be rule of law and there will be repercussions. So not only do we need to think about the firearms and the ammunition and all of those things, we also need to think about the less than lethal options that are available. You've got tasers and stun guns and pepper ball guns, a lot of less than lethal options when the situation calls for that. So I think those are important as well. And along with home security and self-defense, you've got the community. I've talked about this in a past video where you have mutual assistance groups or just groups in your neighborhoods, whether that's just having barbecues and getting to know your neighbors, finding out what they're all about, or having a specific group for if certain situations happen. It doesn't necessarily need to be a prepping group. It can be a group of just concerned citizens, concerned about the state of things in the world today. And if something does happen, they know they've got a group of people to support them in those situations. Now, this is something that sometimes it's a little bit easier said than done, and sometimes it doesn't even get thought about at all. But we can't go it alone. For the most part, the lone wolf is not going to survive very long or is not going to do very well in any of these situations. It takes community. So I think it's important that at the very least, we get to know our neighbors. We talk to our family and friends about some of the things that may be going on. We put feelers out to get to know who's going to be a help in a situation like this and who may be a hindrance in a situation like this. Now, also here, I have cash, and maybe not just cash, but having cash on hand, meaning your money not in the bank. Now, you can't take all of your money out of the bank. It just doesn't work well these days when you're paying bills and doing things like that. But I do suggest, because if there is some sort of banking holiday or something like that, that we do have available funds, whether that's in a safe in our house or wherever you want to put it. I also think precious metals are a good idea. Gold is really expensive, so that is not an option for a lot of people. But silver is relatively inexpensive, and the price is actually going up right now at the time of this video anyway. But it's relatively inexpensive, and it's something that you can put away. Now, I hear people talking all the time about how you can't eat gold, you can't eat silver. In the situations that I see unfolding in the next few months, I don't see some sort of Mad Max type full-scale collapse type situation. I think we are in the middle of a collapse right now, meaning that everything is slowly going downhill. It's not going to all of a sudden one day, boom, everything falls apart. I think what is happening is over the last, you could say decades if you want, but over the last few years, we've seen this slow decline where things are either going to completely fall apart or things are going to completely change. So that's what I see happening. So I do see value in having some gold, some silver, and even some cash on hand in case the grid goes down, in case you can't get that money out of the bank. So having cash on hand, putting away some gold and silver, even, Bitcoin. I've got a little bit of Bitcoin, but I'm not so sure about Bitcoin because it's all digital ones and zeros, right? I want that gold and silver that I can hold in my hand, and it's a tangible asset that I know regardless what happens with the fiat currency, regardless what happens with inflation, that is going to hold at least some value. And historically, it's held up pretty well against inflation. So those are the things that I'm going to be working on here or focusing on here in the next few months or so. I constantly work on these, but I'm going to put a bigger effort into some of these because it just seems like, and maybe this is just me being a little bit overreacting, but like I said in the beginning, I am not the guy to say that it's doomsday tomorrow. We need to get prepared now, max out the credit cards because it's all over in a week from now. But it sure seems like this is the first time since I've been doing this that there are so many different things and so many different possibilities that could happen that could disrupt our lives. Does that mean full-scale Armageddon? Probably not. But there are a lot of issues that really could cause us major problems. I think it's important that we prepare for a lot of civil unrest, riots that rivaled, the riots of a few years ago. I think it's important that we prepare ourselves for the consequences after November of this coming year, because regardless, one way or the other, things are going to change and there are going to be people that think it's the end of the world or the end of the country, regardless which side wins. So I think it's just prudent to prepare for some of these things that might unfold. All right, so that's it for today, everyone. Appreciate y'all joining in. The next podcast, I think, is going to be about preparing for a longer-term grid down type situation. What could cause something like this? Most of the things you see talk about, the basic power outages, something that lasts a day, 2 days, 3 days, the basic supplies we need. And those are important. And those are the ones that we're most likely to see. But we can't ignore these longer term type situations that could be a month, could be 2 months, 3 months, and even longer. So I'm going to go over that, talk about what could cause those situations and some of the things that we can do to prepare for those situations where the fuel that you have might run out and you need that long-term sustainability. So watch for that coming up here pretty soon. But with that, like I said, if you're interested in some long-term food storage, check out mysurvivalfoods.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. And if you're just starting out in preparedness, head over to thebugoutlocation.net. That's the membership website where I have a bunch of courses on preparedness, and I'm even adding a few videos here and there over the next few weeks. But with that, I appreciate y'all joining in today. Take care and prepare, and we'll talk to y'all next time.